Okay, good morning. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and it is Tuesday, May 13th. And we are starting off the morning by looking at some potential new language to add to 319. So our legislative council is going to walk us through this in a little bit, but we have president of Rygate LLC here with us, and I think we can do a little bit of introductions first. We'll go around and telling you who we are, and then we'll let you introduce yourself and tell us about what you're interested in.
Good morning, I'm Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
Senator Terry Williams from the Washington District.
Dan Watson from the Washington District.
What's your Bennington Senate District? Scott back from Caledonia, and I have Rangi.
You see what you're. Thank you. And I'm Libby Carter, president of Rygate as of 2 weeks ago, and also managing partner of Missing Capital, which was the lender to Rygate. Would you like me to introduce the other people who are with you? Sure, if you'd like. Thank you. So I'm Dan St. Ange, who represents our wood suppliers and manages that process for us. And then Warren, we have
That's her.
will work with us as representatives helping us to discuss this.
Great.
Thank you. So thank you for having me here today. I'm speaking on behalf of the Rygate Power Plant as the owner and also as the lender to the plant. Missing Capital is a small business investment company. We invested or we loaned money to Rygate in 2021 to help them grow the plant, especially ancillary services at the plant. Marilyn and I founded Missing Capital 6 years ago specifically to support owner-managed companies in the United States that provide essential goods and services. We are part of something called the Small Business Investment Company Program from the Small Business Administration. And we focus on managing the impact of our investments regarding the number of jobs created or supported in the local economy, the carbon impacted positively, which is our goal, and the economic impact of the companies that we support, as well as make fair return for our investors. The 2021 loan Rygate was intended to really help them develop the site, and they, while working hard on that, failed to really achieve the goals. So after a fairly long and difficult process, 2 weeks ago we took over the plant, and the prior owners are completely gone from an economic as well as management point of view with that in every respect. They are no longer involved. Although, I worked with them 3.5 years to try and make things work. And I realized and thank you all very much for the support you provided to the plant over those years. Despite the economic challenges the plant has faced, they have operated successfully during that time, and as I understand, for the 30-some years prior to the time when this owner owned it. They, last year, for instance, they created $5 million worth of renewable energy credits that came back to the state in exchange for the purchasing by the utilities of the power under a power purchase agreement, which is now slated to extend until 2032 if we meet the milestones in the legislation. We also pay about $500,000 in taxes. We support roughly 21 jobs, although right now we're at 19 jobs. So if you know anybody looking for a job, we're looking for an operator ahead of me. We also, there's about $2 million worth of payroll in that area, which, as you're familiar with, Scott, Senator, that's really a big deal. We have those jobs, they have good benefits, and we also purchased about $9 million of wood chips from the forest supply chains for us, which is what Dan manages for us. And I think that the last time I was engaged in supporting the plant at the legislative level, there was a problem with payments of those wood chips. As a result of the legislation, we have solved that problem, the prior owner solved that problem by continuously paying, and I think. At least as far as we know there, everything is as required and we have filed quarterly statements to that effect. Part of our milestones for extending the power purchase agreement to 2032 was to achieve certain efficiencies, 50% efficiency. That's a big ask. And so the prior owners worked for the last 2 years on developing a plan, getting certifications, getting permits. The last time they came in here, it feels a little like Groundhog Day every time you hear about Rygate, we're looking for an extension, and the last extension related specifically to our permitting process. The air permits from the federal government were very slow, and they did get them. So all the permits are in place for the required efficiency investments. The problem we ran into quite recently, that the prior owners ran into quite recently, is the equipment that was specified for that efficiency is very high efficiency European equipment. We were getting a heat transfer system from Switzerland, and we were getting a dryer from Spain, and they are absolutely state of the art, high efficiency equipment. The cost of those went up about 35% with tariffs. In addition, the financing export-import facilities that the prior owner put in place are no longer available to American companies right now, at least. And finally, probably the final blow was the customer for the dried wood chips at the plant. It's going to be incremental dried wood chips, wet wood chips coming in the plant. We were going to dry them and sell them to a customer with the waste heat from the plant. That customer is Canadian. They are particle board manufacturer for a very large retailer, and that's no longer possible. They're no longer buying it. Tariffs, the uncertainty, all that, so that's off the table. So sort of triple whammy. At that point, the prior owner essentially handed us the keys, and we took it. We've been working with them to that transition because they were having issues. It's not the goal of a lender. It is, however, something that I am personally well prepared to do. I have run companies before, I've run factories before, I'm an engineer by training. I ran, my first company was recycling bottles and paper and plastic, started here in New England, and then went all over the state, and ultimately our company was sold to none other than Cell Oasis, local company, and they're our waste hauler in my house in Ludlow, so I feel it's I'm familiar with the territory, I'm familiar with being a ratepayer and a taxpayer, and I understand a lot of implications, clearly not as well as you. So right now, what we're doing is working to achieve the same efficiency with other equipment. We have to modify the plants. The equipment that we had specified would have worked. We could have gotten it here on time. It's not available to us. We are trying to source, and I believe have perhaps sourced some US resident equipment. It is made in the US, and it's available because another plant in North Carolina did not. They ordered 3 units, they implemented 2 ones of it, which is very good for us, never been used. And another one's available in Oregon. These are very specialized pieces of equipment. Let me just say, it's not like I can just call up a conveyor manufacturer and say, hey, you have this, it's very large, it's very long, it's very specific and highly developed control system. So we need, in order to implement this different equipment, we use a different heat source at the plant, and the plan is to use the dry wood chips in the plant itself, rather than what prior owners had planned to do, which is sell to a third party in order to generate revenue stream. The revenue stream we're planning on generating is to dry wood chips, thereby improves the efficiency directly of the facility. If anyone ever tried to burn a fire knows, well, it's true, dry wood couldn't plant. And so that's the plan. We need a little time to complete the engineer, make sure we can get all the site work done at the appropriate season. These are basically concrete slabs with coverings on them. And that's what we're asking for today. It's about a 1-year extension, so we can make sure we do this correctly. We make sure we get it done in the season and then can test it to achieve the certifications required by the state, because we will have an engineer certified But you're also gonna want to see roughly 6 months of operations before we can do that, and given what I know it takes to get the equipment, get the engineering done, gonna take us pretty much an extra year, we think. We're confident though that this system will achieve the energy efficiency required, and because we now are the owners, one of our goals had been to use that additional 50 acres for ancillary opportunities to benefit the state, create more jobs, and we have several plans in place, which the prior owners also had discussed, but are much simpler, and we've begun that work for the last several months, but it became clear that this may be a problem. So that's what we're asking for. We've submitted to you some revised language that we're requesting, and we're confident we can meet the efficiency goal, and if we get this extension, the timing required to do so. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them, and I was with Dan answering them with products, questions you have or anything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Grant? Yes.
So this is, I think, the third biennium in a row that, whoever is the owner, and I think you're the third owner in the time that I've been asked to extend things for the Rygate plant. And every time we hear a similar story, and you know, in the past I've been asked to, oh, really believe them, and so it gets a little, it feels like a deja vu, Groundhog's Day, the nightmare that won't go away. I'm sure it might feel like that to you even more. So I wonder, and every time we've extended the deadline, we've changed things just enough to make whatever plan they say is going to be the one that works this time to work. And so why should we believe you now?
Understand the concern. Let me clarify, the prior owners were the third owners of the plant since its inception. It was Engie, sold the plant to the Catholic Group. So they were the owners from 2019 until now. So you've met with ones, I don't know how long you've been doing this, but it was anytime after 2019, it was the same owner.
It was the same owner, so maybe it was just different people who came in.
Likely different people, but the same owner.
But every time was a different plan. It was, and different reasons why they couldn't meet the former plan. And, you know, they always wanted us to say, oh, we have all of our ducks in a row and it's gonna work this time. And I mean, what you just said, if I were hearing it for the first time, I would say, she sounds like a reasonable person. These are all, you know, relevant reasons. We've all heard about the tariffs. Your story about them sounds, you know, coincides with what we've heard. All of the things you just said seem very viable and very reasonable. But I have these two other times in the past where I've heard almost the same thing from different people. So what are your assurances? How can we believe you this time?
If I want to put it in context, because I feel your pain, I share your pain. I experienced the same thing as the lender, who was not getting paid, frankly, during these delays. And so my skepticism probably exceeds yours, if anything, with two priorities. However, I also lived through the process. The first extension was really a hope that they could extend from the original 2024 deadline, which was what we expected when we invested in 2021, to 2032 in order to make these upgrades, because frankly, there's a lot of value to having that plant operate. And I think that it wasn't so much a plea from the owner as it was a plan worked with the state to say, you know, this is a good plan. We've got an interconnection, we've got a bunch of jobs in an area that doesn't have them, supports a lot of forest products industries that needs it. And without it, there's no place for this stuff to go in Vermont, and Vermont doesn't have a lot of other resources for power generation. It's increasingly important today, it was even important then. And as we all start using more and more electricity, and electricity is the plan in Vermont. You know, Megan, what are you gonna do? So I think that first request was really a plan, not so much a plea. The second request was, and again, I'm not excusing this because it was painful for me too. But we were waiting for the Environmental Protection Agency federal level for our permits for air to put in the plan we had put in place. And frankly, it never occurred to me that making pellets was going to be a problem. But dumb me, I didn't realize that when you grind the wood chip up into sawdust to create pellets, you release a lot of volatile organic compounds. And all of a sudden, you're violating a regional air quality standard that would not have applied in some regions, but because of the overall impacts here, it applied to this plant, and it was an unexpected surprise. Plus, it took a really long time to negotiate. So ultimately, they pivoted away from pellets to just drying at a very low temperature wood chips and then sending them out of state. Because that was something we could achieve an air permit approval. So that wasn't great, wasn't this mistake, I don't know, I mean, we just didn't. That's what you get a permit for, to check those things, and when we couldn't get it, we had to change. So that was a problem, and the plant did have to ask you for an extension, and you gave it to them, and I appreciate that. As Linda, we thought that was the end of it, because we now have a plan, and we really kind of have that, like in Europe, when you have a wood burning plant, and they have a lot of them, they pull every BTU out of that plant, every thermal opportunity is reused. We don't do that here. And so in our plants, for us to upgrade this plant this way, it's a great thing for the long term of this plant. By doing this investment, whether it's us or the prior owners, this was going to enable that plant to be basically competitive for the long run. We have to upgrade the furnaces, we have to upgrade the boilers, we're gonna have a lot of investment there. None of that's changing. And we're already undertaking that because it has to be done in order for the plant to be viable. But what we didn't expect was we weren't gonna be able to use the state of the art European. I really didn't expect that. I had given the prior owners approval, in fact, personally, to place those purchase orders. We can.
Are you able to cancel those?
Yes,
So
we
that-
were able to cancel them.
Do you, for the.
It wasn't actually our choice, they canceled.
And for the new plan of dry wood chips instead of the wet wood chips, you'll be using the wood chips on site
That's
after
correct.
you dry them. Do you need any kind of permit in order to do that?
Our existing permits will cover that because it's actually less. I don't want to drag you through all the details, but you know, when you burn a plant, you've got a big stack. That's where the high heat comes right out of the furnace. And that's where we burn, which is 380 degrees. We also have something called a cooling tower, which is about 180 to 100, depending on the season degrees. That's where we're going to pull the heat from now. It's plumbing. It's not that process of a heat exchanger way up in the stack, which is very sensitive because you know, if you have your fireplace and all of a sudden your chimney gets cold and it's exactly. You don't want to get a plant like this. So we're going to a more conventional approach. Much lower risk from a technical point of view. We're not gonna get some, we're gonna take water that needs to be cooled coming out of the plant so we can recirculate back in. And we're gonna cool it by running it into a dryer in a big water loop. And then run it right back to those cooling towers. So when it hits those cooling towers, it's already like 60 degrees. So we go from 80, worst case in the winter, 100 in the summer, down to about 60. And then the cooling tower demand is minimal. So what you get is a lot of efficiency just by doing that, and it's plumbing. So your risk mitigates, plus you get a few other benefits. Cooling tower demand is less, electric can be called cannibalized energy. You know, when you're using energy to make energy, you go from 30 megawatts to where we are today, 19.8. We're hopeful that by using less energy on the site, we fix that. We also have reverse osmosis machines to make really clean water in that plant. Why, we're not sure yet. One of the things that we are trying to do now is as the dryer comes into functions, you're burning off a lot of your sort of evaporating off water, and that becomes vapor, so it's distilled water. So that's going to feed back into the reverse osmosis machines to eliminate the need for that power demand again of the energy use. So we know that these are technical fixes that work. They are used conventionally, as opposed to some of the things that were proposed before, which were much more sophisticated. And so I guarantee you that the plumbing works. That you put a warm pipe in a cold building, it's gonna heat it up. That I'm confident of. I think what we are working on really hard right now, we have an engineer under contract to do this, is to certify exactly how warm and how much evaporation we can achieve. Do we go from 45% moisture content to 35, or can we go from 35 to 25? What will that do in our boiler? The boiler is, we had our boiler owner, manufacturer, working on exactly that, in that particular boiler, in that particular place, at that particular age. What do we have to do to make that function as effectively as possible? Can we get to 50%? We think so. Rough calculations, yes. It's not as good as taking 3 degree, because it's for sure gonna work then. We're closer to the edge. However, because of the two other things I just mentioned to you, I think that we benefit in other ways. And we also have 50 acres that we're looking actively, which we have been before, at doing other things to. So when you think of the plant in its totality, with the interconnection, we think we'll be able to generate a little more power.
What do you mean doing other things to
Well,
those
there's a-
50 acres?
There was a proposal at one point prior to which we haven't completed yet, to put either solar greenhouses in those spaces or just a solar power plant in those places to support more generation on the site, because you do have the interconnection right there.
Yeah.
And that both of those would generate more power.
And where are you getting the wood at this point?
Same place we're getting, we will not do a big thing here, is we're, if I do it this way, we do not require incremental wood. Because the wood basket is sufficient, would have been probably sufficient to be for the incremental wood required. But then I'll tell you, there are days when we don't get enough wood. So we wanted to keep the same volume of wood that we're getting today. We know that's reached some kind of equilibrium.
And where's the wood coming from at this point?
All over New England.
It's not coming from Canada, because I would assume that would cause tariff issues.
No, there's no tariff.
And you're not shipping it from North Carolina?
No.
Okay.
A lot of Vermont, a lot of New Hampshire, a lot of Mass. I got a lot coming up in Connecticut.
And would you mind just introducing yourself for the record?
What's that?
Would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Dan St. Derby, Vermont. I'm the wood buyer at Rygate, and I have several other companies up in Derby, Vermont.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
So we think it's a conventional approach. We've identified equipment that'll work. We know it'll fit on site. We know we have the wood, because we're already getting that wood, so that risk is gone. So we've mitigated risk every has where we can. And frankly, we are aligned with you. We want this, because if we have a more efficient plant, the plant becomes viable again. Right now, I've got a plant that's not viable. And so I am highly motivated to get this done.
Okay, Thank you. I hope I don't see you sitting here again next year. Or at least for a different purpose. No offense.
I'm not gonna say that. But I will tell you that we will communicate frequently with the department.
Maybe we should just have a field trip. I don't know, because all the times I've heard about this, I've never actually.
City plan.
Yeah,
That would be interesting.
add it to our list.
That is the list, yeah.
We could take a wakeboat up there.
It's
Combine all of your.
It's an hour and a half, it's not bad, longer now with all the road construction, but it's really impressive. And I have a niece and nephew who live, my grandniece and nephew who live nearby there, and I took them over there recently, and they were standing in the bucket. You know, and it's everything is of a scale that we don't encounter every day, and when you see the continuous speed of the wood chips going in there. It's a good plan, you know, it's been running a long time. It's good.
Yes,
And
sir.
it's base load power.
It's based
We
on.
don't have a lot of base load power in Vermont. If we lose base load power, our electric rates are going up.
Yeah, I mean, I heard all the arguments the
Yeah.
first time we did this, and, you know, went
Oh, yeah.
through all of the calculations and all the reasons why. It's good for our power grid and et cetera, and also the economy and all, you know, all those things, it's mostly just. It's just a repeated kind of pattern that is a little.
Sometimes doing the right thing takes a while.
It's not easy stuff, this is, I mean, I have to say, this is hard.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, thank you. Appreciate you sharing about how things are going there, what you all need. And so we're gonna transition to our legislative council. Welcome.
Thank you. Ellen Capacity Office of Legislative Council. Where do you want me to start?
I. There's the main ask, and as I said, there may be a typo that is being corrected here. So let's start with the main changes.
Sure, so, I missed the first part of the testimonies, so I will need to watch it, because I think I missed one of the asks, but, I didn't really know what was happening until, even yesterday, I did not really get a full ask. So, what you guys are talking about, so, it's good to look your lawyer. So this language that I sent to Jude this morning changes a couple of the dates in the statute that has the timeline for requirements for Reg 8. The Reg 8 statute is 30 VSA 8009. I will start with the typo. So last year's Act 142 did push out all the dates 1 year last year. And so when I was reviewing the statute yesterday, I did notice that Lexis in printing it did not update one of the dates, and so that does need to be fixed. So perhaps that has caused some confusion, but I just noticed it yesterday. So if you're looking at the document that I provided on page 1, it's what was highlighted. And so the first dates that are in the bill, that are in the statute currently are in subsection D. So subsection D says that on or before November 1, 2027, the commission, PUC, shall determine for the period beginning on November 1, and the statute currently says November 1, 2026. That doesn't make sense, right? You can't determine, we're talking about determining a rate. And so they shall determine for the period beginning on November 1, 2027 and ending on November 1, 2032, the price to be paid to the plant. So they're gonna do a rate case to update the rate, and so if you move forward with an amendment, we'll make sure that that date is correct. If you don't, I will be contacting Lexis to change it regardless, because last year the bill did change it to 2027. So that is a typo on Lexis's part, not this, so we gotta get it corrected in statute. So, so one of the big pictures to keep in mind is talking about the dates here. What is essentially a power purchase agreement with the state and Rygate currently goes until 2032. So from 2022 to 2032, the statute dictates that all the utilities of the state, unless they have been exempted, are required to purchase their pro rata share of the power that Rygate produces. There is an existing order setting the rate that the utilities have to pay, but that order was from 2012. And so there is consideration in this statute that says that the PUC should do a new rate determination after updates to the plant have been made. And so currently in the statute, it's the PUC will start doing a rate case in 2026, have it finished by 2027, so that the rate from the end of 2027 for 20 to 2032 is the new updated rate that will take into consideration some of the things that Rygate is required to do. So this is the date you could potentially change again. Currently in statute in 2027, by which the PUC has to have the new rate. Starting at the bottom of page 1, there's the statute that's part of the statute is the co-location and efficiency requirements. And so those requirements are on page 2 and 3, and it's the timeline by which Rygate is required to make certain demonstrations to the PUC that they have taken steps as outlined in this statute. So the first step was that the owner had to this is a big step back. So within 8009, the phrase baseload renewable power portfolio requirement and baseload renewable power plant refers to Rygate and the energy that they produce, which is different than other types of energy that are produced in the state is baseload renewable, it's biomass. So this statute has some specific jargon in it, but we are talking about Rygate is the only utility that meets the definitions in the statute. So the owner of the plant shall cause the plant's overall efficiency to be increased by at least 50% relative to the 12-month period preceding July 1, 2022. In achieving the efficiency, the owner shall comply with the requirements of the subsection. On or before July 1, 2023, the owner of the plant has to submit to both the PUC and the Department of Public Service a signed contract providing for the construction of a facility at the plant that utilizes the excess thermal heat generated at the plant for a beneficial purpose. Beneficial purpose may include the displacement of fossil fuel use for the sustainable production of a product or service or more efficient or less costly generation of electricity. They also have to submit a certification by a qualified professional engineer that the construction of the facility shall meet the requirement. So reaching the 50% efficiency. So that date already passed, that was in 2023. The next date is this year, and this is one of the dates that was pushed back from last year's bill. So on or before October 1, 2025. Which would be getting pushed back to 2026, and which was previously 2024. The owner of the plant shall submit to the commission and the department a certification that the main components of the facility used to meet the efficiency requirement have been manufactured and that the construction plans for this facility have been completed. So that is what is due, what was previously due and is currently due this year, October 1, 2025. So you could push that out 1 year. Then on page 3, number 4, if the contract and certification required are not submitted to the department or the commission by July 1, 2023, or the requirements in the next section by October 1, 2025, then the obligation under this section for the retail electricity provider to provide the pro rata share, the purchase by the utilities, shall cease on November 1, 2026. So this is one of the first deadlines where the power purchase agreement could actually cease if they don't fulfill the requirements by November of this year. And then the PUC is not required to conduct a rate determination for that second, so it could end by November 1, 2025. But assuming that they do, the next deadline is September 1, 2026. The department shall investigate and submit a recommendation to the commission on whether the plant has achieved the requirement for the 50% efficiency. If the department recommends that the plant has not achieved the 50%, the obligation under this section shall cease on November 1, 2026. And the commission is not required to make an updated rate determination. And then after November 1, but if so, then with November 1, in the fall of 2026, the commission would then start conducting the rate determination case. They do think it will take about a year because there are a number of factors that they will be considering to set the avoided cost. Then they will have the new rate set in November of 2027. After November 27, the owner of the plant shall report annually to the department, and then the department shall verify the overall efficiency of the plant for the prior 12 months. If the plant efficiency falls below the requirement, the report shall include a plan of how to get the plant back to the required efficiency within 1 year. And if they haven't reached the efficiency, the commission shall commence a proceeding to terminate the obligation of the utilities to purchase this power. So there are multiple dates in here. They have been sort of evenly spaced. If you can consider if you are pushing back one, if you need to push back all of them. Still in the statute though, is that overall it terminates in 2032. Unless one of these other triggered events happens and it is terminated sooner.
It's good.
So has the department done checked into any of these efficiencies from the previous dates? Have they done what they're supposed to do?
I don't know, but I think overall, what the first couple of requirements didn't actually require the efficiency to go up yet.
Yeah.
The first couple of requirements was them having a signed contract for use of the facility and engineering saying that whatever use they're going to use it for will meet the efficiency rate. It hasn't actually required any construction at the facility yet. And I think I missed part of the testimony, but I think what you heard was that they haven't increased the efficiency yet. So I don't know, you could hear from the department what they've heard or what they've looked into.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I do think we should hear from the department, but I also, so this first date, on page 2, line 6, the July 1st, 2023 date, that has passed.
Yep.
What they submitted at that time, presumably they did submit something, is not what they're doing now.
Okay.
So it's a totally different plan. So I also think we might want to have them resubmit their plan to the public service department and say, actually, this is what we're gonna do. And make sure the department is okay with it.
Yeah, and that had occurred to me as well, that whatever they had provided might be obsolete.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is, I think, 2 plans ago, the 2023 one.
Yeah,
Maybe,
yeah, go ahead.
has the plan been updated to reflect what you're now envisioning to do?
It's Ms. Carter, go ahead.
We are, we are working on the new plan, and we concur that it would be appropriate for us to resubmit that planning process. We've engaged we've undertaken it already, but it's a 3 to 4 month process to really be able to get the certification from an engineer that this is viable, how we're gonna do it, meets all the requirements. What we do believe, however, which is part of that plan, is that our current air permit, which is the tricky one, will cover what we're doing now because it's less impactful, excuse me, than what was being done before.
So we could maybe move this date to September 1st, 2020. What's this year? 5. That would give you a few months
I
to
think
get it.
October would be better,
October
because that
first.
gives us enough time to do it right. It gives us, we have 3 months with our engineer. Then we have to start explaining it to the department, and we have to work through the permits to confirm that all that's done. So having about 5 months is not, not too long.
And by this date, you mean the one on line 6?
The one that is, what I'm referring to is the submission of the plan that was done in 2023, but now needs an update.
Which,
Does that line 6?
well, that's.
Yeah.
Submit to the administration.
I think that is the plan, cause they have a plan on record from 2023. It's just completely out of date, not what they're doing now. It might have been a shrimp or something like that. I don't know, but it was not what they're doing now.
Yeah. Right, cause this plan has these 2 parts, A and B.
Right, and there was this, we had a long conversation about making sure that what they were planning to do was actually going to meet the efficiency requirements, all of this language we put in 2022. And that we wanted an engineer to certify it, cause they came in with a bunch of like somewhat kooky ideas, like,
It's around this.
yeah, we gotta make sure that this is feasible and what they're proposing now is much more coherent and conventional than what they were originally proposing. But I still think this process would be helpful to
Yeah.
have them on record, if
Yes.
this is what they're doing and this has been certified.
Yeah, so maybe change this other date, July 1st, 2023 to October 1st, 2025.
Yeah, and I don't know what that means for all the other dates, but probably that they all get pushed out a year. So what my guess is what they're asking.
That's exactly right.
Yes, there are a bunch of dates in here, and then the first one, the one that's an error, the error that Lexus made. My guess is that was, if it was supposed to be 27, probably it should be 20, but.
Well, so question for Ms. Carter, do you think that if we have this, if you resubmit the plan, which it sounds like you relatively speaking already have in place,
We have to do a
yeah.
plan.
So is it reasonable to have both October 1st, 2025 for the plan and keep 2026 for certification of the components have been manufactured, its construction plans have been completed, which is what subsection 3 is saying.
Yes.
Yes, so then that would move the 20, so stepping through the legislation. Chairman, then the 2026, section 3, the 2026 date is when we have to have
Right.
essentially the plant manufactured and sort of identified, that's the season when we can put in all the concrete. And then by the time that's done, then we can put the equipment in place. Then we can start the 12-month period of validating the efficiency, because we can't turn it on until it's there, obviously. So we need 12 months as required here to certify that the plant's running, and we won't be able to turn it on straight away. It'll take us a few months to turn it on, get it tuned up and running, so probably we'll end up about exactly a year pushed out on every single deadline.
I wanna make sure that I'm clear, so you're okay with line, I don't know if you have a number. Your lines, so you're okay with on page 2, line 16, that year still being 2026?
Well, it's right now 2025.
Right.
Yeah, so.
And so
Yeah,
you would pushing it out to 26.
26.
Okay, that's what I thought, I wanna make sure I was very clear. Okay.
And then the 2023 on line
Becomes
6 becoming October 2025.
Yes. So then I think every date moving out 1 year would work for this request.
That's
But
what
on page 3, line 3, there's another July 1st, 2023, so we might wanna
Yeah,
look at that one. Oh, that would be October. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So make sure I'm following.
Great. Okay. Okay, any other thoughts on this? I would, we can see if we can get the Public Service Department and the Public Utility Commission in here to comment on it, or if they can't be here to make some written comments. So that would be helpful, and moving forward, my thought at this point, well, is to include this in 319, but any thoughts or concerns or questions about this?
I think.
Yeah.
It sort of fits in there from a. Tremendous there.
Mhm.
Well, it's.
It is a
Not
different section,
A,
yeah,
it's A and R, this
right,
is not.
this is
A and R.
public, this is true. It's not. Well, let's hold off on that and have some more conversations about that, and then we'll come back to this tomorrow. So, okay, thank you. Thanks. Okay, all right, so we're switching, to a different part of 319.
Thank you, good luck.
We had some conversation about a particular section on the paint, portion of 319, and so we'd just love to circle back to that and, invite, Mr. Chapman up to share some thoughts about this particular section. Let's see if I can get back to it. I think it's, for our purposes, it's on draft 4.1, page 26. Subsection 4.
Sure.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So for the record, Matt Chapman, Director of the Waste Management and Prevention Division at CEC. So my understanding was there were some conversations around, basically the convenience standard and having it only apply to architectural paint as opposed to all paint products. And the rationale for that is that many of the newly added products are going to be things like solvents and things that are basically difficult to manage outside of sort of a very structured event, people who know how to manage these sort of flammable materials. So the agency is comfortable with having that convenience standard only apply to architectural paint. I don't think there needs to be any changes to this, but I've made it very clear to Paint Care that we would be expecting the same sort of convenience requirements that exist for HHW, because basically that's where this would be managed. It would be managed at sort of your local HHW events and not mostly through retail collection locations. And again, just sort of backing up, that's what the real concern is. It's the convenience standard is currently met by use of retail collection, and retail collection is not well suited for collecting collectible sort of materials.
And when you say retail collection, you mean that it's returned to this, Auchan's or to the store that's going,
Sure,
whatever, yes. Okay. Right, because they're not gonna take back paint thinner and, yeah.
And we would actually have there's potential concerns for that. So we, at a minimum, we need to manage our way. If there are retail locations that want to do it, I think it's possible. But there are going to be some requirements for those stores to go through, and I don't think you can apply the same convenience standard that relies upon those retail facilities, right? Because they've mostly been probably allowed to play.
Yes, go ahead.
So a possibility to recycle and reuse the paint fillers and like you do the paint.
So I know that they are likely going to bulk and manage the paint thinners and such as a solvent. I mean, again, I know that some of that is going for energy recovery, right? So from that perspective, I don't think that we're like sort of reusing it as a paint thinner, right? that requires a level of sort of management that I think the solid waste districts, I mean, so again, when you're managing at an event like this, it starts getting very expensive and difficult to do at an event if you're segregating and managing sort of types of solids in sort of different ways to maximize the recyclability. So.
Yes, good.
So bottom line, Matt, we got, I think, in a loop of confusion about this one paragraph and on page 26. And you can look at mine.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, this is the paragraph.
Yes.
And I think, and Michael isn't here, but it was a question of how that should be.
So I think, and this is sort of like, I think it cross connects with some of the comments that Paint Care gave and Paint Care wanted this to be applicable to architectural and not to all paint products. And we support it only applying to architectural because of the.
So architectural should not be crossed out then.
Correct.
Okay,
Was it on line 9?
in all the cases, I think. We want this.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
You agree with them
We do.
that this should be post-consumer architectural paint products?
Yes, that would work.
Okay, so we need to make some changes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's what
I thought I heard you saying, but
Okay.
that's why I got very confused, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So I want to include
Sorry, go ahead, Senator.
so I want to include architectural thing.
Yeah,
Right,
because
because
this
it's
is
limited.
saying provide for convenient and available collection. Just wanna make,
Collection of post-consumer architectural.
Because the non-architectural paint products would be dealt with elsewise. Correct.
Well,
So, and
so
Okay, good to you.
we're not the only.
Yeah.
Matt.
I know. Well, I mean, to be honest, I was focused on sub 5, which is really where the use of sort of laying out the infrastructure is. So I think, and I'm sorry to make this more complicated, as I know you all want to make things simpler. But I think really where it's in the sentence on lines 12 through 15, which basically says a paint retailer shall be authorized as a paint collection point for the program if they volunteer and complies with all. I think that should be, I think it should be the paint retailer shall be, that's where the architectural paint line should be. So it's not having architectural paint on basically what's struck out on lines 13 and 14 on page 26.
so not having architectural.
Removing the deletion.
Oh,
Sorry.
Okay, what about the prior to those?
I think that's okay. So that's basically saying use the existing HHW collection system. It's really when you get into the retail collection and mandating the use of retail collection for things that are not architectural paint that becomes an issue, right?
So it should be of post-consumer
Architectural paint.
so this should all be put back in,
Correct.
okay.
So we're just talking on lines 13 and 14.
Yes.
Okay. Because they could volunteer to.
I think there is a possibility that we could work with Paint Care to come up with a training and collection program that will allow certain retail locations to participate in a collection program. I think there's a lot more work that Paint Care and the state need to do because of the material that we're talking about here before. It shouldn't be a shall be if they want to be. It's, I think, a much more, so architectural paint, that's easy. The other product stream, I think there needs to be more discretion and flexibility for the agency to build the program out if it makes sense.
I think I just wanna read through this like one more time, so describe again how it will provide for convenient and available statewide collection of post-consumer, so we're gonna leave this drug architectural things,
Yes,
okay? Available statewide collection of
Yeah, sure.
paint products. Yeah, okay. That makes sense because they need a plan for all of the paint products.
correct.
Okay. Then, okay, the producer or stewardship organization shall use the existing household hazardous waste collection infrastructure when selecting collection points for post-consumer, again, paint products.
Correct.
Great, we're gonna use the HHW infrastructure, okay, cool, and then a paint retailer shall be authorized as a paint collection point. Of post-consumer architectural paint for the paint product stewardship program, if the paint retailer volunteers to act as a collection point, complies with all the applicable, et cetera. Okay, I feel good about that, having this read through.
I understood. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and just to check with Ms. Crowley.
Yes, Allison Crowley for American Coatings Association. My understanding is my boss at Paint Care and Matt discussed this language in depth, so I'm very comfortable.
Okay, with this,
Challenge
with this change, okay, so we will flag this for our legislative council to make this change. For a draft that hopefully we'll be voting tomorrow, but that also just depends on other witnesses on this other stuff, so, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you like helping us sort through this and figuring out what it ought to be. Okay, that's great. All right, so let's take just a quick break because we're gonna switch topics. It's talking about housing and we'll come back at 11:30. Okay, all right, this is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and we are coming back from a break. And we are gonna be talking about housing, and so I've got an amendment that I would be interested in potentially tacking on to 479, and I think we've got language hashed out, which is great.
Council will be here tomorrow.
And just to give this a little bit of an introduction, this is a pretty simple addition. It asks ANR to do a report on some different kinds of options for wastewater permits. So I'm actually gonna invite our Secretary of ANR to come share a little bit more about this, but you know, in as far as there may be some alternatives or streamlining of the process, I'm all for that, so I'll turn it over to you.
Endeavored to get all the way into the meeting this morning before. Here. All right, excellent. Good morning. For the record, I'm Julie Moore, the Secretary of Natural Resources. And I have a handful of slides. The first couple deal very much with the amendment you just spoke to, Chair Watson, and then two other changes that the agency has expressed interest in seeing as part of the housing bill to just share with you all, and if there's interest, can provide draft language around both of those as well. So really three possible ANR related amendments to the Housing Act. The first is this report on new direct discharges to surface waters. Second would be some adjustments to the language around sewer line extensions. And third would be adjustments to language around how we manage wetlands in designated centers in industrial parks. So currently Vermont's water quality standards include what I would say is an effective prohibition on new surface water discharges. And this has sort of come around as a long and ongoing dialogue with the General Assembly, with key stakeholders and others that essentially says that a new direct discharge from a wastewater treatment facility. This is for domestic wastewater. I don't think we would propose any changes around industrial wastewater. Has to show first that there isn't an alternative method of disposal. And the alternative method of disposal tends to be soil-based disposal systems. So think giant septic systems. And we gained quite a bit of experience with these giant septic systems over the last 5 years by virtue of what we call the Village Water and Wastewater Initiative, which was an ARPA funded initiative that looked to support municipalities that have in general a village center, but don't currently have municipal wastewater treatment with constructing a system. And probably the best known example of this is Montgomery. And they have gone through an extensive process in looking for a location in which to site their soil-based disposal system, community support. This is to treat about wastewater from about 100 structures in their village center. So these are not huge systems, but it has become clear that it is both complicated and expensive. We've also seen other locations where they've been either unable to identify a suitable site for soil-based disposal or have found suitable sites but did not have the link from the owners. And so the thought here would be to ask ANR to prepare a report, to sort of lay all of that out in a thoughtful manner about the current process for permitting new surface water discharges, funding that's available to support those sources, funding sources available to support those projects, which frankly, outside of ARPA is kind of limited and probably an important factor to have on the table. And then to be able to offer some recommendations to you all in terms of how we might improve process. And think we could do that between now and the end of the calendar year, and then have that as a basis for conversation in the second half of the biennium, if the committee is interested. So I'm happy to pause there. We're going to jump into the other two.
Yeah, let's pause there. And so, any questions for the secretary about this? Yes, go ahead.
You were talking about?
Yeah.
It's essentially gather all of this information into a singular place to serve as the basis for a conversation.
Yeah, okay, so just taking a look at how it's going, what some options are, funding sources, potential improvements. Yeah, good.
These next two suggested amendments are ones that have been part of the administration's housing bill, but A&R has continued to champion. This one may be of particular interest to you, Senator Watson, because it has ties into the Elks Club property here in Montpelier, which is currently our ability to make loans from the state's revolving loan funds for water infrastructure cannot happen in areas outside of a designated center. And so the proposed amendment would essentially allow that to happen if it was for an eligible housing project. And the thoughts here are concerns about sprawl and that have kind of governed this. And now we've got these sort of competing concerns around sprawl, but also around a lot of our downtowns and village centers are in our floodplains and flood hazard areas. And so thinking about when we're building new, if we're building adjacent to those existing designated centers, but maybe a little bit further afield to get outside of harm's way, this change would allow us to happen. There's a whole set of criteria. I don't have it in the next slide. There's a whole set of criteria in that section of statute that we use. And so it's not an attempt to obliterate the other criteria, but essentially to say these projects that are for housing that require a sewer line extension could be ranked using the other criteria alongside all of the other projects. And just for reference, we are currently seeing somewhere between $2 to $3 worth of applications to our revolving loan funds for every dollar we have available. So it's not a slam dunk or guaranteed funding, but it at least allows these types of projects to be part of the mix.
Yeah, one question about that.
Sure.
You mentioned that it would that perhaps these sewer extensions could be allowed for eligible housing projects. Is that a qualified, like, is there a criteria for an eligible housing project, or are all housing projects somehow eligible for this? Does this question?
Like you're asking essentially, is there
Is it just affordable housing? Is it, like, what is the housing projects that this would be?
I would want to get back to you on that. I don't know that the way it's structured, unless there are other changes associated with housing definitions as ACCD put forward their package, that it would necessarily have those sidebars, but could appreciate that that is an important point of information, whether it's affordable housing or a certain number of units of housing, certain distance removed, etc. And it's not to say that designated centers can't ultimately be expanded to include these areas, but that is a time-consuming process. And so part of this is intended to address kind of the urgency of the moment. And there's just a handful of areas where we've seen this come up, where we don't have the ability to make loans to support the necessary infrastructure to allow those housing projects to progress.
Yeah, question?
No, I really wanna look at the other criteria, because you raised the issue as well, that has been a concern. And make sure you really understand why this is even to need to solve. So.
I'm happy to provide that reference and just make a note of it and sort of give you our thoughts.
And I do recognize that it's kind of nonsense, by the way.
Yeah, I picture with the appropriate guardrails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other criteria around like addressing a known environmental concern, let me pull those up. Not gonna end there, because I think there's 8 or 10, so.
Seth, were you referencing the chapter 2?
Yeah, probably. The secretary mentioned that there were other criteria, so much really like,
Oh, okay,
but I have to look it up myself, that matter, but. What?
gotcha.
So there is this priority point system and then there are criteria in statute and I can get you both of those.
Yes, okay.
Right.
And then the last of the changes is around wetlands permitting in designated centers. So currently statute and our rules don't create any distinction between wetland impacts occurring within a designated center or industrial park and those occurring across the broader landscape. And so it can make challenging achieving goals around compact settlement. So the proposed amendment would make 3 changes. It would reduce buffer zones around class 2 wetlands in these designated areas from 30 feet to 25 feet. It would limit jurisdiction. I put class 1 wetlands up there, because that was a question that's been asked, but class 1 wetlands aren't in our designated center, so it's sort of a non-starter, but just to be fulsome in my representation. So really limit jurisdiction to class 2 wetlands that are identified on our BSWI maps. As you may recall, the governor proposed and the legislature supported, in addition to the DEC based budget, I think 4 years ago now, of $250,000 that allows us to do periodic map updates. We're essentially updating all of our wetlands maps in the state once every 5 years. This is the initial update that we are just about complete with. We will be next year. And so the quality of our maps has improved dramatically as a result of this investment. Focusing jurisdiction on mapped wetlands in these designated areas would allow projects to develop with confidence that they don't need a field assessment in order to lay out an initial design and to move through the regulatory process. Right now, in general, folks come up with sort of a sketch plan. They then need to hire a wetlands consultant who can really only do delineation work during the growing season. Those consultants are out on the ground, mapping the edges of boundaries. We then come out on site and confirm that their work was done accurately. And only then can we start to have a conversation around mitigation and avoidance. This would essentially say the wetlands on the map are the wetlands we're going to regulate. And so you can draw those out on your project parcel right now and begin your planning process. And to the extent you can avoid them, you can move forward with confidence without us having been in the field. It also would propose to reduce the mitigation ratio, from 2 to 1 to 1 to 1 in these designated centers. The idea behind the 2 to 1 ratio is to ensure we have no net loss of wetlands. And you should have received a report from our wetlands program last month, but it indicated that in 2024, through our regulatory program, we allowed the filling of just about 1 acre of wetlands statewide. For perspective, during the same time frame, we created about 135 acres of wetlands through conservation and restoration efforts that are largely being led by our Clean Water Initiative program and Fish and Wildlife Department. So we are sort of actively creating more wetland statewide as we go. There's clearly some localized impacts and folks may have strong feelings about sort of landscape level versus site scale level. But just to make the case that I think this is reasonable and doesn't undermine our overall goal of no net loss of wetlands. And then the last piece would be an amendment that would direct the agency to publish guidance on our wetlands mitigation sequence. This is probably one of the areas that I get the most questions about in terms of our regulatory process. And folks looking for additional clarity and guidance. And so there was part of the housing bill that would direct us to publish guidance. I suspect we will move forward with that work regardless of the legislature's action, but I do think including it in the housing bill sends an important signal back to developers that their concerns around consistency are being heard. And we're committed to completing that work.
So, can you say a little bit more about the compensation sequence. What does that mean?
So our sequence is first you avoid wetland impacts to the extent practicable. Then you look to mitigate for any unavoidable impacts, and then finally you can participate in what we often call the in lieu fee program. Which is currently administered by Ducks Unlimited, but it allows people to pay into a fund that is ultimately used to conserve and restore wetlands. That compensation piece tends to be very expensive. I think the going rate currently is somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 an acre. And understand that Ducks Unlimited is looking to increase the price. So it acts as a pretty strong deterrent for folks to avoid and minimize impacts to wetlands to the maximum extent possible. It's also part of the reason to look at going to a 1-to-1 compensation ratio for unavoidable impacts in our designated centers. Again, in recognition and trying to balance the incredible value wetlands have on our landscape with wanting to have compact village centers and affordable housing.
So, I wanna make sure that I understand. So this one is about, it's not proposing any change to how it is, how that sequence goes, but just directing to publish the guidance.
Correct.
Because is it not published now?
Correct.
Curious.
Yes,
Okay.
well, we are in a process of taking our informal guidance in many different settings and making it formal, having a public comment period, just so raising overall awareness. And this is one that's high on the list in terms of priorities the public has shared with us for where they would like to see us have clear guidance that they could.
Okay, and then I want to back up to a couple of the other things that you mentioned. So with the moving from 2-to-1 to 1-to-1, you referenced there was a report that we received a little while ago. I just want to asterisk that to say, like, I'd love to have you or whoever else, the relevant people might be in to talk about that. I mean, my takeaway from that was like, wow, we lost a lot of wetlands. I think that's what I saw, and that was surprising and a little bit disheartening, actually. And anyways, but I would love to make sure that I'm understanding it properly and dig into some of those details, which we don't really probably have time for right now, but just flag it for January.
Yeah, and happy to have that. And I think it is challenging, right? We have this very specific regulatory construct where projects that are proposing to impact wetlands are subject to this level of scrutiny.
Yeah.
And yet over here, in another part of the agency, we have teams of staff in our clean water program and in the Fish and Wildlife Department that are actively engaged in wetland conservation and restoration. And I feel like one of the things I've wrestled with is we talk about these things like they aren't trying to serve the same goal. We've got a regulatory scheme and then a sort of voluntary conservation and restoration scheme. And it's important to bring them both together. In looking at that report, I put it in like, put the impacts in square feet and you put the restoration in acres, like people are gonna look at this and see tens of thousands of square feet of impact and 100-something acres, but it doesn't cause the same comparison. There's a little footnote in there, which was a response to my concern that shows we conserved and restored like 15 million square feet of wetland during that same time period. But it's a hard story to tell. But I also think it's good, and so it would be somebody from our wetlands team, probably Laura Lapierre, who heads that shop, and then Will Duane in the Fish and Wildlife Department leads the wetland conservation and restoration work that's funded out of our Clean Water Initiative program.
Okay, well, I'd love to flag for the future, have them to help us understand that story further, so that'd be great. Awesome. And then one other thing, this idea about if I'm understanding the wetlands mapping idea, so it's saying, here's the map of our wetlands, this is it. no need now for like on the ground checks.
Correct.
Right.
Let me give you a couple of examples. If I can put this, like.
That's okay, because my question is sort of, based on that, I mean, my understanding is that landscape is dynamic. And so how often would the maps, or are the maps updated? Can you comment on like the dynamic nature of mapping or of the landscape really?
Yes, so the maps will be updated once every 5 years, is sort of what the resources we have available are sufficient to support.
Mhm.
And it, in some ways, that works out really well, in that when we issue a wetlands permit, it's good for 5 years,
Mhm.
right? So if you came in with a proposed project, we essentially lock the wetlands that are in the ground in place for purposes of regulation
Mhm.
for 5 years at that moment. So these things line up pretty well. They are dynamic and changing over time, and at the same time, we can't be constantly reassessing every site every year. And so that's the sort of compromise we've reached on how that work would work. I did find my other slides.
Okay.
So let me see if I can share these with you.
Sure.
So what I have are 3 different all central Vermont projects. Where we compared sort of the mapped wetlands on the ground with the wetlands that have been since assessed in the field. Uh-oh, security. Help protect me.
Bum, bum, bum.
I know, that one canceled. Oh, there we go. Alright. So this is Prospect Heights in Barry. The image on your left is what is shown in those updated wetland maps. So don't be fooled by the red. Really what you wanna focus on is that purplish blue color that shows where those map wetlands are. The brown and orange areas in the right image show the wetlands that were established by looking on the ground. And so what you can see is that sort of the 2 most significant wetland pieces are identified in both. And yet there is more wetlands on the ground than is picked up through the National Wetlands Inventory. This is the Plainfield project, I think. Yes, where they are looking at potentially relocating their city center. This one actually maps up almost identically, in that if you look over. Can you see my cursor?
I did for a second.
Yeah, so it's right down here in the
Oh,
bottom.
there it is, okay. Yeah.
You're seeing that blue purple area, and it largely matches what you're seeing here in terms of a wetlands area at the bottom. And then this is an area that's been in active agriculture. Some of the conditions suggest there are wetlands on that other farm field. They weren't picked up from our aerial survey. And then finally, this is the Country Club Road site in Montpelier.
All Washington County examples.
They are. Part that there's a lot of work being done in that space with some of the federal funding sources around redevelopment. So there are 2 little mapped blobs of wetlands that largely map with the wetlands that were indicated through the field survey. And just to make clear, a lot of what you're seeing in this area is actually small streams, and there's no change proposed that in terms of allowing development to encroach on those small streams. This is really, those changes are focused on wetlands. And so for the Country Club Road site, the practical effect would be a 25-foot buffer around those 2 wetland areas as opposed to the 50-foot buffer.
So, and just to be clear, so each of these slides, whatever's on the left being the National Wetlands Inventory, what role does that National Wetlands Inventory play now?
So it is the suggestion we give to the public about where class 2 wetlands exist. Everything shown on the map is a class 2 wetland, but there are lots of things not shown on the map that are class 2 wetlands. That delta between what's shown on the map and what exists in the real world is shrinking dramatically as we build these better maps. But there is still a delta, which is what those images are intended to convey. It's more or less depending on what site you're on, but we think it's sort of a reasonable balance in terms of the expediency around being able to start to lay out housing projects, going back to this project in Barry. They made this conceptual plan and then mapped the wetlands and came in and said, well, we can only build half of what we thought we could build. And my answer was, well, over on this west side of the drawing, we all know there's a wetland there, whether or not you've been on the ground, and maybe those lots are buildable in that the houses would be tucked up closer to the roadside as opposed to pushed back. But, to me, this piece, would have to be reworked regardless of the regulatory scheme. But then it's questions about this sort of long arm of wetlands that sort of follows the proposed road alignment. And whether we've got the balance right in terms of natural resource protection and our housing goals and compact settlement, which adds to our life.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Dr. Secretary, at this point? Just recognizing also we're over time, but
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Quickly, the national wetlands inventory, you talked about your mapping being much better than that, so we're talking about two sets of maps.
So there's the National Wetlands Inventory, Vermont's part is the Vermont State Wetlands Inventory, so that's.
So when people look at the national wetlands inventory, that they're actually seeing the better mapping.
Correct. Correct, and that's
Okay.
being actively published through our Natural Resources Atlas, and there will be a press release in the next few weeks here about the next set of map updates that are going to occur. And we take those rules or those maps through rulemaking, so the public will have a chance to review and comment on them.
Great, thank you so much. All right. And just to clarify, so the proposal that we're looking at right now is just on this report about direct water discharges and streamlining that permitting process. But thank you for putting all these other ideas on our radar.
Sure, now, would you like me to share around the draft language we have for those other changes for your consideration?
You can certainly share them, that's fair. And would love to get those slides that you just shared to Jude, that'd be great.
They're on.
Oh, they're on, that's it, amazing, okay. And for now, this one part is all that I feel like we have time for at the moment, but thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. And with any other thoughts or closing comments? Oh, I have one other thing to say, which I continually was forgetting, which I just wanted to apologize. I had that floor amendment about taking the word impact out of 481, and I did just continually forgot to check in with you all to give you a heads up that that was coming. So thank you for bearing with me on that. Not my intention to sidestep you all on that one, but it was pretty small. So there we are.